Hey there, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our very last episode of the Exploring the Full Life Cycle of Developing a Dapp. This episode, we are actually joined by Nick, Kevin, Amal, and Josh. So you got more of the Truffle crew on this last episode. And just a quick housekeeping for Crowdcast, the platform we're using for this webinar. As you can see on your right, this is where we can chat with each other. If you add a question to that chat area, you can actually add it to the add a question queue, which is where we'd like you to queue up any questions you have throughout the webinar, now or later, and then the guys will answer those questions at the very end. And then you can certainly upvote any questions that are already in there. Add your comments as your answers if you have comments to add. Also, there's some polls that we'd love for you to answer if you haven't already. All this is at the bottom bar there. And then finally, we have a call to action where Truffle Teams Pro, you can get a chance to try that Truffle Teams Pro features, which is really great, for free for a whole month. If you haven't already, it's something to definitely check out. Okay, so without further ado, I'll hand the mic over to Kevin.
Awesome. Thank you, Shay. And yeah, welcome everyone to this fifth and final episode in this series that we've been doing. As I mentioned, the theme of this series has been exploring the full life cycle of developing a decentralized app. And the theme for this one, the topic for this last episode is going to be looking at what's new and upcoming in the Truffle Suite. Before we jump into it, just some quick introductions. I can speak. I'll start and then we'll go from left to right. So yeah, my name, again, this is more for folks that are joining for the first time, because this obviously is the fifth one. But yeah, my name is Kevin Bluer, and within Truffle, I focus on some of our product development. I work on a little bit of the ecosystem kind of side of things, working with partners on plugins and boxes and so on, and also manage some of our training as well. So with that, I'll pass over to Josh to introduce himself.
Thanks, Kevin. Hey, everyone. I'm Josh Quintel, and I head up product at Truffle.
Nick.
Hi, I'm Nick. I lead engineering for Truffle.
Well, yeah, I guess that leaves me. Hi, I'm Amal. I follow Nick's lead, and I love onboarding people to our ecosystem and working on really great tools.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, guys. You can see the little party emoji up there as well. As Shay mentioned at the start, and as you've just seen, we've got 4 of us in here. So we figured because it's the last episode and because it's the kind of holidays are getting close, we'd make it, get everyone, not everyone from Truffle, but a nice subset to join us and yeah, make this a bit more of a fun episode, hopefully, at least. Just for context, again, if you're kind of joining this series for the first time, really what we've been focused on from a kind of goal perspective is to really look at the full life cycle of building a decentralized application. And as you can see on this graphic here, historically as a suite of tools, we've been more focused on the left of the development life cycle, everything from coding, building, writing tests, and to some degree elements on the right, but it's always been a little bit more kind of bolt on or kind of patchy in terms of perhaps some of that experience. That's changed with Truffle Teams, or at least that's our intention to change that and give a kind of first class experience on the right hand side of this, where it gets a bit more into the DevOps side of things in terms of release management, deploying to networks, and then kind of tracking and monitoring your Dapp post that as well. It's obviously very important. It's not just about the build, it's about the workflow beyond that as well. So really in this episode, just to kind of re-summarize, yeah, we've been looking at that whole life cycle and exploring a few Dapps in the process of that and the building of them. In terms of the roadmap, I caveat this in, I've been caveating this in every episode because we've been following this very loosely. The original intention when we started this series was to kind of be a bit more kind of explicit in terms of, okay, this episode will focus on these 2 stages, this episode will focus on this stage. As it's played out, we've kind of moved back and forward a bit more across the life cycle. Although that's probably a little bit more, potentially a bit more reflective of how the development lifecycle goes. So kind of caveat there with this. But yeah, as mentioned as well, the focus of this one is kind of pulling things a little bit more together and just looking at a bunch of other things. And I think I've actually got a slide on this agenda, on the agenda for this one already as well. So yeah, as mentioned, what's new and upcoming, specifically what we're going to be looking at. Again, if you've seen the previous 2 episodes, we had a kind of new project that Tim drove by and gave to us, so kind of jumped in and gave to us, and that was a Truffle badge. I'll kind of break that down. I'll recap that in a moment. But either way, we're going to be closing that out in this episode with a new final request from Tim. That's kind of part 1. Part 2 is going to be a look at what's new and upcoming more formally at the kind of high level within the Truffle Suite, a little bit kind of glimpse of our roadmap and kind of where we want to take things. And then finally, kind of shift gears a bit and just look at the kind of current state of the development of ETHEREUM, development in the ecosystem, and diving in and looking at it through a DeFi lens. That's one kind of obviously very buzzy thing in the space right now, or has been for a little while. We haven't really touched on as a theme through this series thus far. So we figured kind of just to close it out completely, we'll just have a little kind of dip into that. So that's the plan. Quick pause, as per we've been doing in every episode, for a poll. Questions, if you haven't answered them, or the means of answering the questions is at the bottom of your screen, or it should be. I think we've actually asked this first one in a prior episode, but if you haven't answered either of them yet, just go ahead and do so. And Shay, what's the results so far on that?
Yes, we got hello from Texas. All right. Yeah, thank you. As you join, please say hello and then let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd like to know where across the world everybody's joining us from. So the polls that we have is, do you also use Infura in your blockchain development? We were interested in that cross-pollination possibility. A lot of people, to answer your question, Kevin, yes, was the main vote. For most people have been using Infura as well. And then there was a few no's. So that's actually good to know. And then, have you used Gas Station Network before? We actually have more people that say no. So there were a few that said yes, but just that must be newer to most people.
Cool.
And then, sorry, one last question. We have in the Ask a Question queue something we put in there for you guys. And if you have any questions, please add that to this queue as well, and we'll answer at the end. But we'd like you, when you have a moment, to answer what blockchain development tools other than Truffle do you use? We're just curious about other tools that you have to use or found to use in your blockchain development. So yeah, that's it, Kevin.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Shay. Yeah, and in regard to that second question, Gas Station Network, it's a little bit of a loaded one because we're going to be looking at that in a moment as well. So if you haven't used it before or don't even really know what it is, not to worry, we'll kind of unpack that shortly. Cool. So to kind of cue us up for this kind of first part, which is this final request from Tim for this project that we've kind of been hacking on throughout this one has been through the last 2 episodes. So we're going to kind of build on that a little bit more. Just to recap it, Tim, so this is all a bit contrived, of course, but dropped in some requirements for us. So the first one 2 episodes ago was for us to create a badge, a Truffle themed badge. It was just before Halloween that we did this one. So we kind of, the ask was to make it Halloween themed. We wanted to make it possible that we could award these badges to folks participating in webinar series such as this. Also make them tradable via marketplaces such as OpenSea. So we explored that a little bit. Obviously it needs to be deployed somewhere. The ask was to put it on a public network. Obviously, ultimately that's likely to be mainnet, but we put up, I think it's on Rinkeby, and then storing the assets decentrally as well, which is what we looked at. We did most of that, and I've got a summary in the next slide of what we've done or did. And then the other kind of ask, which was in the last episode, was to genericize the tokens a bit because Halloween had come and gone. But the kind of more technical one, the kind of one we focused on, was kind of upgrading, if you like, or exploring EIC 1155, which if you haven't seen it or familiar with it, it's a newer standard, essentially multi-token. So if you were to leverage that, which is what we looked at, you get essentially compatibility for 721s and ERC20s as well, and this concept of like transmutability between the two. And there's a bunch of kind of enhancements in the way it works internally, so it's a bit more efficient in terms of gas use and other kind of features, the ability to like bulk mint tokens, which is interesting as well. So we kind of explored both those things. Where we got to pretty much just ticks everything off. And by the way, as a side note, and I'll call this out again at the end, all of this is on this repo that accompanies this series. So under Truffle Suite org on GitHub/webinar Truffle Badge. We've broken it down into different branches. So steps 0 through 4 is basically all the, well, in fact, steps 0, is 0 through 4 for all kind of all those things. And step 5 is going to be what we're kind of exploring today, just kind of jumping ahead to tell you that. Okay, so that's kind of what we've done. And what we're going to look at today is this final request from Tim, which is this last requirement, or so he promises. And any chance we can let people gaslessly claim badges via meta transactions. So that's an interesting ask. And the reason for that is it would be great for new folks to the ecosystem. Well, this will, as a thing, will be great for folks who are new to the ecosystem who perhaps don't have any ETH yet. Maybe they've just installed MetaMask and created a wallet in doing so. Don't have any ETH, and we want to kind of start exploring onboarding them, into Dapps. It's quite an important thing. And as you'd expect, queuing things up here is for a next quick exploration of Gas Station Network and how we might go about integrating that into the Dapp that we've built so far. A little bit of background first. As always with this series, we've tried to kind of keep slides, although we do have a bunch, but keep them to minimum, or at the minimum, making sure we do get hands-on. We'll be doing that in a moment. Just a little bit of background first on what GSN is, taken from opengsn.org's site here. So Gas Station Networks of GSN abstracts away gas to minimize onboarding and UX friction for Dapps. More specifically, with GSN gasless clients, or wallets that don't have any gas, or just wallets in general, because you can still interact with them. It just doesn't require you to send gas with the transactions that you're submitting or sending. Gasless clients can interact with Ethereum contracts without users needing ETH for transaction fees. Why? We already alluded to it, but one is going from the kind of bottom up of that list under the why bullet there. Onboarding is obviously a major reason, because you're essentially because you're abstracting the need for gas to be sent with your transactions, you're essentially subsidizing that. It still needs to be paid, by the way, but you are essentially, as a kind of Dapp creator, obfuscating that, or subsidizing that for people interacting with your Dapp. And we'll see how this all works in a moment. Other kind of use cases, privacy, because when a transaction is signed, it goes through this relay, and it's the contracts that do a separate collection of contracts that do the signing. You could essentially, stealthily allow people to withdraw tokens or other assets from your contracts, or other things from your contracts, to other addresses. It wouldn't be, immediately visible to the contract from which you're taking, in this case, perhaps tokens. And then lastly, just different payment models. So rather than for transactions needing to be paid in gas, you might want to put forward a token or in fiat through a stable coin. So allowing people to pay different mechanisms there. So really cool. And I'm gonna say it's brand new thing, but it's it's kind of been bubbling away for a while, but serves an increasingly important role, especially if we want this ecosystem to grow, which we all do. Diving a little bit further, and this is the last slide on this before we get kind of hands-on. And this is more just kind of about the kind of how and so on. From an end user experience perspective, what actually happens, and this is on the right-hand side, this little dialogue screenshot is taken from MetaMask, wherein someone is essentially doing the same thing as, like signing gas fully, but this is the dialogue you would see if you're sending a gasless transaction. It's a little different because obviously you're not seeing any fields related to the gas you're sending, the limits, and so on. What's actually happening is the user is just signing the transaction with their private key, and then that transaction is being relayed to essentially, well, this is a decentralized network of essentially web servers that behind the scenes are signing on your behalf, and then it's being resubmitted from that contract address with gas. But you as an end user have just signed it, but not sent it, or at least not sent it directly to the network. So that's kind of the distinction there. And again, we'll kind of unpack this further as we go through, and we'll see it running locally on my machine. Another thing to note is this concept of strategies. And really that's about mitigating like bad actors, obviously, because in theory, someone with kind of dodgy intent could abuse this. They could just fire off signed transactions and drain gas potentially. So there's different strategies to kind of mitigate that. Won't go into them just now. And then finally, the kind of like implementations of this are already out there, because it's a combination of the contracts that facilitate it, this relayer infrastructure, and in the, from a tooling standpoint, there's a nice CLI as well that helps kind of facilitate a bunch of this stuff. So OpenZeppelin have some support. My understanding of where things are going with it is some of their support's rolled into this initiative, this OpenGSN initiative. There's kind of a bit of parity between some of the stuff on the OpenZeppelin side and OpenGSN. I'm probably missing detail there, to be honest, but they're between the two of those orgs. There's a whole kind of basket of different kind of implementations and support for this, and probably others that are out there as well. So yeah, I mean, we're not having to kind of build a ton ourselves, but we'll see all this in action now. Cool. And as mentioned, we're going to be seeing some new stuff in the context of Truffle, or particularly Truffle Teams, as we do this now as well. So hands-on with some new stuff while adding some GSN support to our project. Let me just come out of full screen now. And I'm going to move this over here. Just rejiggle my windows a bit. I'll put the slides on this side. Right. So kind of to recap, again, this project, hopefully you can see this. My screen res is kind of down as low as it goes and hopefully visible. This project here is the one that we've been building already. And as you can see here, it was leveraging an ERC 1155. We added the ability to award a badge, a batch, etc. Nothing wildly sophisticated, but we as we built that out, we were using Truffle Teams and seeing the workflow there, and evolving it and so on, collaborating on it. So what we've done now, and to add GSN support to a given project, to your contracts, pretty straightforward. Is some nuances you need to be aware of, and we'll kind of cover off a few of those. You start by just adding the package, the GSN package in this case, or OpenZeppelin's implementation of the same thing. I've just gone with the OpenGSN one for now. And then you would just add a couple of Solidity files. I think this is like an abstract contract and an interface that you're adding, inherit from those. And then really it's just a bunch of like helper kind of functions that you need to implement. These ones related to forwarding or forwarder are because your contract is, because gasless calls are going to be coming from a forwarding contract. Essentially, another contract is going to be invoking it, the given gasless, given function gaslessly, or at least to an end user. You just need to put in this support for recognizing the forwarder, just so that can't be abused. And then because another nuance is you never access the sender or call data from message.sender or message.data directly. You do it through these kind of these helper functions that do a detection, and we'll step into some of this logic briefly in a moment, but do a detection to see, again, where it's come from. Is it just been saying gas fully, or not, or and then kind of handling either case. So there's a couple of like helper things that you need to add to your contract, and then it's really nothing else, well, minimally nothing else. But really, for any function that you want to be invocable or is going to be invoked from a gasless perspective, really the only difference you need to do is just any references to message.sender, you just call that function instead, _message sender. And the rest, as we'll see, is kind of handled for you by the infrastructure, by the network, and so on. So let's jump in to the team side of things. And what we're going to see now is kind of doing both a gasful and a gasless example. So let me just full screen this now. So we're in Truffle Teams, wired up this project. Caveat, we're on my dev environment here, because some of the things we're about to see are just about to go live, I think this week, maybe next week. But I've already done a bunch of stuff, and that's stuff that we've seen in prior episodes. So, I've made some commits, basically added this stuff, committed it, that's triggered a build. You can see that here. I'm to look off to the left here. So if you see me looking to the side, yeah, see all the builds. And then the builds were successful, of course, in this case. So I clicked into So my machine, my dev environment grinds to a halt here, which is always great during demos. That's why we put the big warning signs there. Oh gosh. Let me just click back to see if. Okay, fingers crossed. This is my dev environment, but I did test it earlier. So just fingers crossed this is going to be okay. Yeah, so we had a sandbox already. You know, sandbox is a cloud-hosted instance of Ganache deployed to it, and then this is the output of that deployment. So you can see the contract address there. And now, first step, what we're going to do is, and in doing so, see a new feature, is invoke this kind of Gaslessly using, oh, sorry, I clicked into the wrong place. Under manage, that's what I meant to do. Oh, it's the same spinner. Okay, ignore me. Yeah, so what we can do, this is a new thing that we're literally is about to go live. And this is what we call Contract Manager. And you can see two things here. One is the decoded state on the left, current state of the contract. And then on the right is the means of essentially invoking any given function within that contract. Similar in to Remix or EtherScan have a similar thing as well, but it's nice that it's now kind of baked into Teams. So what I'm going to do is just do a quick check of the balance of, I'll just do a check against this address. I think it's my machine that's slowing down here a bit. And this token ID is 888. So we've got 29. I've been playing with this a bit, so that's why there's so many. But we're going to see this hopefully bump up a bit in a moment. But remember that number. So this one, we're going to award a badge to that same, oh, sorry, wrong one. We're going to just call claim badge no gas. That doesn't take any arguments. Everything's going slow for me. There we go. So yeah, this is a gas full or kind of normal transaction, as it were. Let's go ahead and send that. And we got the transaction hash or the receipt. So let's just test that again. 888. Awesome. So that bumped up. So that was okay. So we essentially called that Gaslessly. Another kind of neat thing we can do, and again, this is to show. So that's new, by the way. Of course, about to go live. Another kind of newish thing to show is some enhancements to the debugger. We did show the debugger briefly on a couple of the episodes prior, but there's some new things about to go live. Again, my machine is, or my dev environment's kind of a bit sluggish. It's not normally this slow. Okay, yeah, cool. So yeah, few new things to note on the debugger here is syntax highlighting, breakpoints, keyboard shortcuts, and so on. But just to show you what I want to say, we're stepping into this now, claim badge no gas function that we created. I guess I'll just quickly show like a little example of breakpoints, which is kind of new, and you can kind of jump back and forth, and wherever you put a breakpoint, it jumps you into them. It's kind of nice. And then if I just continue until, it's going to go into that function. And then this is where this is a kind of GSN thing where it does this detection. So is this invocation of this function coming from just literally a wallet, from an externally owned account, or is it coming from, in this case, a forwarded on from another contract? In this case, coming from the GSN. So the answer is no, it's not, because we just called it normally here. And we'll step in, and then that will do its thing, and can kind of continue back until the end there. So it's kind of some neat new stuff going on. Did I click that? I think it's just my machine is slowing down. There you go. Kind of going to the end of that function call. Cool. So that's a couple of new things there. We haven't really shown anything in terms of GSN per se, other than just showing the bits that we've added to make it kind of GSN kind of compliant. Now, kind of the final kind of piece I wanted to show is how we would now call this Gaslessly. So I've just spun up, and again, this is in this repo if you want to try it out. So I can now claim this badge with no gas. And to try that out, I'm going to do one thing. I didn't actually plan for this, so I'll probably screw it up, but so I'm just going to generate a brand new account, get its private key there, and just import that into MetaMask. And by the way, I've pointed this MetaMask instance at the Ganache sandbox. So 0 ETH in there. Let's just go ahead and connect it. And now I'll just refresh the page just to make sure that that's good. And again, it's going to be slow. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Okay. So now this is we're calling this from a wallet that has no gas associated with it. And okay, making me nervous because it's also slow here. But okay, so again, as we saw this little screenshot of this dialog box earlier, this is a little different to what we saw before, where in usual MetaMask, signing and sending a transaction. This is just signing it and it's sending it to this relayer, which is then re-signing it and then forwarding it on to that contract. So sign, and this is the error is actually not an error. That I didn't wire the success state up correctly. So let's just get that address there quickly, and I'll try and speed up just in the interest of time. Go back to the contract manager. It's getting me on edge because it's so slow here. And then let's do a check for the balance of it's 888. That's kind of hard-coded ID for this token. And then in theory, yay, we got 1, which is awesome. So we called that Gaslessly, right? That was a brand new account that we created, 0 gas. And then again, just to kind of reiterate, what we did is we just signed the transaction. We didn't send it directly, at least. We sent it through this relayer. Relayer re-signed it and then sent it on, with gas attached to it. So really cool. So I think we ticked off. Let's get back to slides to make sure I haven't missed anything that I wanted to show you guys. Kind of covers everything. Oh, and then the other final thing, and this is if you are playing with this yourself, I did throw a little exec script in here as well that does the same thing from a script if you just want to test that out as well. So this will just kind of go off and send this Gaslessly, and you'll see a bunch of, I didn't really mention, but I'd started the relayer and a few things locally. I can tell this is running slow. It wasn't normally this slow there. That's obviously a lot of characters being spat out there, but essentially this is behind the scenes. And and I didn't stress as well. I put all of this and pretty thorough notes into this README to kind of walk you through that if you want to try this out locally yourself, and using Truffle Teams and so on to test it out in a Ganache sandbox. Cool. Let me just go back full screen. So that was pretty much it. What I wanted to show for my piece, just to kind of recap this particular project. So what we did was we built, as per Tim's request. He didn't really ask for these, by the way. We just pretended it was Tim asking for these. But yeah, what we did, as per Tim's request, was created this Truffle badge. It was initially in the RC 721. We then upgraded it, if you like, to an 1155. And got some of the benefits of that, and we kind of saw that workflow. And Josh, and I collaborated on that in the prior episode. And we've then switched it out to make it kind of GSN kind of compliant, as it were. And then saw how we tested that out again in a sandbox, and then doing all that. Already alluded to this, but we went through this flow, and we explored the development lifecycle and so on. And then the repository for this is all there, and I'll kind of recap those 2 URLs at the end in case you want to kind of jot them down. But if you just go into TruffleSuite.org and look at all our repos, you'll see these near the top. Cool. So that was it. Any questions with this? Feel free to throw them into the Crowdcast questions, and we'll get to them at the end, time permitting. And with that, I will hand over to Josh to kind of zoom out a bit and look at high-level themes of what's new and upcoming. Over to you, Josh.
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. Hey, everyone. Josh again, here to talk about what's new and upcoming for Truffle, specifically for Truffle Teams. So what's new and upcoming really kind of falls into 3 different buckets here. We've got workflow stability there. So, we've shown through this webinar series, the development lifecycle and how the team's workflow contributes to all of the pieces of that. But not all the features that we've shown in this webinar are actually released yet. So those are going to be coming soon, and I'll talk more about that in a second. Next up, we've got general enhancements. So these are kind of fine-tuning a lot of the available features you've looked at, adding certain automations, adding different conveniences, more data, etc. Also going to talk more about that in a second. And then finally, security features. So even though we're going to be focusing mostly on enhancing the existing feature set and workflow, there is kind of an exception to this, and that's going to be security functionality. So for those who have been paying attention to crypto news, you may know that we have folded into Consensus. If you didn't know that, there you go. And so we will be doing some security-focused collaborations with the other groups within Consensus, including our friends at Consensus Diligence and MythX. Super cool stuff there that I will be excited to show you. Next up, please. Thank you, Kevin. So workflow stability, as I mentioned, yeah, we've talked a lot about the development lifecycle, and what at a high level, what does that workflow look like within Truffle Teams? Well, here it is. If you've got your initial smart contract code written, you're going to run your build within Teams. Once that's pushed, then you're going to spin up a sandbox, whether it's a forked one or a regular one, just to deploy your contracts and iterate those. You're going to use our visual deployment manager. From there, you can then interact with your contracts. So we can try to, run some tests against them, do some quick demos. In this example here, we're going through the workflow. So we're kind of trying to prod around, looking for errors by interacting with these contracts. So we fire off a couple transactions. We hop over into the monitoring screen, which now, since we've updated the deployment screen, actually applies both individually to a single contract instance, and you can now also monitor your deployment as a whole and see all of the transactions there. But in this example, let's say we've interacted with a contract that we're testing for bugs. We hop into monitoring. Oh, we see some transactions failed, or maybe one succeeded that we didn't expect. And we can just right from that screen, click the debug button, and we're off to the races. We can step through and see exactly where the source of that error is coming from. And then, even though it's not in this cycle, you go back to the coding, planning and coding step, and we start it all over again. So really great, very fast way, right, to iterate on your smart contracts. You're doing all this in a single tab of your browser. You don't have to switch around. You get the context of what you're doing the whole time, thanks to having a GUI to manage all of these things. So just really excited to, finally have this workflow buttoned up and start really promoting it and showing its power off even more. Next up, general enhancements. So that workflow is all well and good, but of course it could always be better. So some kind of general enhancements we have on the horizon here include ones to the monitoring screen. So the monitoring screen is really great if you're actually looking at it at the time. It has a lot of great information, of course, including your transaction lists, balance, etc. But we want to make that screen a lot more useful even when you're not directly looking at it, make it a little more reactive and informative for you. And really that boils down to triggers, alerts, and anomaly detection. So as I mentioned, when you're not on the screen, you could get an alert. This could either be an alert in the application, an email, a push notification, etc. But either way, the thing that triggers those alerts are going to be triggers that are set up by the user and anomalies. So triggers that are things that you set up as a user. So things like a block list, or less nefariously, maybe you just want to know when a certain event fires, things like that. You could get an alert based on that. And then secondly, anomalies are essentially alerts that triggers that we as the Truffle team can set up for you, things that we know kind of spell trouble for smart contracts. So things like the balance draining very quickly, a sudden spike in failed transactions, things like that. And then secondly there, the monitoring screen begins monitoring your contract from the time that you add it to that screen. So that means either it happens automatically when you deploy your contract, or you've initiated an external deployment and you upload the artifacts. So when we start observing the contract from that point, but we want to also give you the ability to go back and get that historical data. So especially in the case of like external deployments, you can get that the full context there for what the contract's been doing. Next up, debugging public transactions. So the debugger, you may remember us mention in the previous webinar that it only works actually for sandboxes currently. So definitely want to add the support in there for the various public networks, bring it up to feature parity with the Truffle debugger, the CLI debugger, I should say, there. Next up on the deployment screen, custom network support. So if you deploy currently to, of course, a sandbox, you can configure and all of that. But if you're deploying to a public network, you're always deploying through Infura. There are cases where you may not want to do that. Maybe you have a Dapp node in your house. Maybe your organization has their own set of nodes they want to deploy through. So we're going to give you the ability to supply your own RPC URL and deploy on your own infrastructure that way. Side effect of that is actually that will grant like what I'd call version 0 of Quorum support. So for those who don't know, Quorum is a private implementation of Ethereum. It includes some additional privacy features layered on top. but it is compatible with the Ethereum API in the sense that once you can supply your own RPC URL, it could be a quorum node, and you'll be able to deploy your contracts. The only issue being that there won't be any of the privacy enabled features that would come down the road, but that'll be kind of a cool benefit of that. Last two real quick, because I know I'm kind of rounding up on time here. Continuous deployment, so you can always manually deploy via the deployment screen, but especially in the context of iterating rapidly in that workflow, you're probably going to want to automate that step, especially if you're basically just updating and pushing the same feature over and over again. So we're going to allow for those type of workflows, perhaps a push to your feature branch automatically deploys it to the sandbox, for example. And then finally, the dashboard. Talked a little bit about alternate context on the monitoring screen there. We've got the full deployment level and then down to the individual contract. So there's going to be a lot more like drill down type of stuff like that coming to the dashboard in the future as well. And then finally, the security features I talked about. So this is all very much in a state of flux and an early exploration, but just to kind of tease it a little bit, we're going to be collaborating with our friends at Consensus Diligence and Mythex here now that we are within the fold. And so for those who don't know, Mythex is a security plugin that is going to test your contracts for vulnerabilities. Specifically, it runs your contracts against a very cool database the team's put together of common smart contract weaknesses that is called the Smart Contract Weakness Classification Registry. When I'm done talking here, I'll put a link in the chat. But essentially, so Mythex runs this for you, and one really cool part is that the dashboard it produces actually will show the transactions that led to your contract falling prey to this vulnerability. And so one possible integration we're exploring is that to give those transactions a little more use, we could actually launch into a Teams debugger instance, and you can really see exactly, right, like step by step, how that actual weakness was caused, or how that actual weakness was triggered, rather, in the contract. So super cool stuff there on the security analysis front. And with that, I've talked a lot about Truffle Teams, but talking about the larger Truffle Suite, I am going to turn it back over to Nick and to Amal. And Amal, you've got a great perspective on all of this and on the ecosystem at large. So I will hand it off to you.
Well, thank you, Josh. That was a lot of stuff that's coming down the pike, and there's a lot of details there. But the perspective is, I like to ask why. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this now? So the state of Ethereum development has always driven innovation at Truffle. In the early days, its tools facilitated more efficient workflows, from testing your contracts to deploying your contracts with our command line and our side chain, our test chain Ganache. But smart contract in those days were like early proof of concepts, things like simple storage or single contract state machines. Simplicity themselves. Thanks to tools like Remix and Truffle, you could get in there and figure out what was happening, reason about the system. But now we're modeling new financial interactions, and concepts and complexities have grown because now we have multiple actors interacting. Developers need more information so that they can reason about the state of their project or the environment that their project's ecosystem. Like even on the front end, I've seen conversations where developers are starting to think, maybe we need better tools and design patterns, like better state management and coordination between UI frameworks. The common theme here is that complexity is exploding. It's scaling fast, and there's a much more urgent, greater need for dev tools to provide insightful experiences. So the question that we have to answer is, what critical set of information can we surface to allow developers, researchers, auditors, and anyone to better reason about what's happening on Ethereum? These are the things we want to focus on in 2021. Improving DX, developer experience, and onboarding. Josh spoke about those in specificity, about security and workflows specific to teams. And I'm really looking forward to see what the greater consensus team can provide that we can collaborate on. And speaking of complexity in our system, DeFi. Who groks that? There's a blog post coming out every day that's like the next, useful insight. Who groks it? I don't. What I like to do is, if I need to learn something, I start with our fine Truffle debugger to inspect the transaction and see what it's like. That gives me the best perspective, what's actually happening in code that I can build my understanding on. And speaking of enlightenment, or Satori, Nick, could you please take us through the transaction?
Absolutely, Amal. Although I have to say, you really have me thinking about way more use cases than I was prepared to address in this webinar. So I'll just stick with the one that I'd prepared for, which is the idea of reasoning about complex systems that are not your own. So I will share my screen. Give me a sec to find the button. All right, so everyone familiar with Uniswap? So what I'm going to show today is how to use a feature that exists in the command line debugger that we'll be adding to Truffle Teams' debugger shortly, but just to kind of entice everyone or give a teaser. I mean, you could use this functionality today if you're comfortable with the command line. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a transaction to Uniswap, and I'm going to debug it. And so how does that work? Well, we have the Uniswap docs up here. There's that address. I have that open in Etherscan. I'll just do a refresh. Let's find a transaction to debug. I'll go here. Let's grab one. This one's failing. We'll grab that. We're going to grab that transaction hash, and then we're going to need to be able to connect to mainnet. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use a Truffle Teams sandbox. So I'm going to make a new sandbox. And this is just to configure Truffle. So here, I'll make a new Truffle project. And then I will configure Truffle to talk to that sandbox. That's the transaction hash. I need the sandbox URL. And I specify that it's network ID 1 because it's mainnet, right? So that's all well and good. Now we have to get that transaction hash. And let's see. So note that up until this point, I don't have anything about Uniswap in my project at all. All I did was I made a new Truffle project, and I configured it to talk to a fork of mainnet. And then I'm going to run Truffle Debugger, and I'm going to pass the --fetch--external flag, which will get all of the relevant information from Etherscan. By example, Etherscan has all of the source information. So Etherscan has everything that Truffle would need to know about in order to provide a comprehensive debugging experience. So we're going to leverage that, and that's what this fetch external does. And we give it, let me grab that transaction hash again. So we'll give it that transaction hash. You can see it's starting Truffle Debugger. It's compiling any contracts you have locally. I don't have any locally. But then it's going and it's going to talk to Etherscan to say, hey, I need all of the contracts that this transaction touched, which in this case, it was just Uniswap, really, right? You can see this is a command line debugger. Well, there's two. So this transaction touches two separate contract instances. Truffle Debugger figured that out, and it went and got all of the information from Etherscan to provide this experience, and now we're in the debugger. So for those of you who are more familiar with the Teams debugger, well, in the command line, it's kind of the same, except instead of buttons, you have to type things. So you can type N to step next. You can type O to step over. And I'll just do C to continue to the end. And here we go, we have an error. So this is what went wrong. And you can see, well, there was an error. It was on this line. You can also look at what the variables were. You know, there's a revert string. You can hit L to see where you left off. So you can also look at individual variables. So maybe we'll see what amounts was. And then we'll look at amount out min. You can see that if the minimum starts with 1.5 and we have 1.3, that's where the problem is. So hopefully this kind of gives you a sense. This is a very simple example, right? If we're talking about debugging DeFi, there's DeFi transactions. I mean, there was a flash loan a month ago that was enormous. It interacted with 30 different contracts deployed on mainnet. So, I mean, in the effort of time, I mean, it takes a long time to load up the debugger with a transaction that complex. So for this webinar, I'm just showing you Uniswap, but hopefully you can get a sense that if you have some transaction where you don't understand it, you can use some of the tools that Truffle provides to kind of zoom in and get a view of what went wrong. So in this example, we zoomed into, I picked a random transaction, a random recent transaction, you know, from 5 minutes ago. And I took a look at what happened, right? Reset, and step through, and we can see here everything's going fine. Everything's going fine. I'll step over to go a little bit faster. And then it fails. So if you expand from there, you can kind of think, oh, well, with a more complicated transaction, there's more to dig into, right? I mean, I just hit step like maybe a dozen times and I found the error. But in a more complex example, maybe it would take a little bit more digging, but you know, you can always add breakpoints. Break on 476 and reset and continue into the breakpoint. Now we're at the breakpoint. So you can kind of use these tools to zoom in and see what went wrong. And hopefully that helps. I think this is a really cool feature. I use this all the time. I mean, you know, being in the space, I'm often made aware of different projects that launch, and, you know, invariably some of those projects get hacked, or there's some vulnerability or something goes wrong that people didn't expect. And my first reaction is to figure out what that was and how it works and how everything fits together. And so, I mean, I love this fetch external functionality. It's been essential to my own workflow to understanding the space that I work in. And I hope everyone else finds it useful as well.
Yeah, I just want to add that what I love about this workflow, Nick, is that it also gives you the ability to take notes that you can use to contextualize what's happening, that can act as a really great bit of documentation for what's happening with the transaction. So it's a great starting point and a lot of potential there. Yeah,
I can't wait to get it into Teams. Like, I mean, I love that I can show this to you all now. And I mean, how many steps was that? Like 4? But in Teams, it'll be even easier because it's in the web, it has a UI, and you won't have to do a lot of manual clicking to get that same kind of insight. So I'm really excited about it.
Yes.
Alrighty. Cool. So I think that's pretty much everything that we had for this episode. I hope that was useful. We'll jump over to Q&A in a moment. So if you have any questions and you haven't thrown them into the question box yet, feel free to do so. Before we get to that, just a thank you for checking in or tuning in to both this episode, and if you made it to any of the previous ones, thanks for joining us. A few other next steps or points to note. Firstly, if you want to try any of this stuff out, as I mentioned earlier, I've thrown a few links in the chat just now, but they're here in the slides as well. So that's links to the first project that we kind of worked on in the first 2 episodes, which was kind of pretty simple. It's actually simple storage. We build it up, we built on top of it. So we used that as a base and then built on top of it. So that's on that first link there. And then all the badge stuff, which was the previous 2 episodes, and obviously the first part of today, is in that second repo. The fetch external stuff that Nick just showed is in that, well, at least a blog post outlining it and how you can kind of try it out yourself if you haven't used it before. That's a good blog post to get you started. And then final two things, we are planning a new series for the new year, which we're calling the Unboxing Series. And in that, perhaps as the name maybe suggests, we will be going through a box, in most cases a new box, either one that we've launched ourselves or with a partner, and kind of just dissecting that and walking through that together and giving obviously context. So if it's like a DeFi based box, then we'll kind of give context of that project, that protocol, and then walk through that box and kind of explore it. It's a really great way to learn and kind of champion projects that are going on out there in the ecosystem. So look out for that. And then finally, feedback, across the board, both our, all our tooling, this series, questions as well. Shay's going to mention in a moment the Slack community that we have. If you're not on that already, great place to join and ask questions and connect with us, and for us to connect with you. So yeah, with that, I will say go to questions, and then hand off to Shay in a moment to close out. So I'm on full screen. I actually can't see any questions right now.
Yeah, so I'll pop them up for you. Okay, great. So yeah, we will take a look at the questions we have in the queue. And thank you guys for adding those. So the one question we have is coming in from Tom. What sage piece of advice would you like to give someone who's just getting started writing tests for their Dapp? And then I know Nick already had an answer, so I don't know if you want to expound on that, Nick, first, and then everybody else.
Yeah, I'll expand on it a bit. Although I should say I'm not the best at writing tests. There's some other people on the team are a lot better than I am. But sometimes when I get stuck trying to write a test for some piece of software, what I do is I try and write it in English, right? Like let's say I'm writing some feature. I mean, we can discuss it, maybe the Truffle badge, right? Okay, I need to award a badge, right? Or I need to be able to claim a badge. So I'll write that in English. I should be able to claim a badge. And then I'll think about it. What does that mean, claim a badge? Well, if I hit the claim badge function, I should only get one badge. I shouldn't get two. So I'll test for that, right? Like that's like, I think about it in English first, and then I'll translate that to code. And I'll continue to refine that process to just kind of like, I'll test my own understanding of the requirements, and I'll express that understanding of the requirements in English, just like note-taking, and then I'll see how I can kind of suss that out into like actual like automated tests. Hopefully that kind of gives you a sense of one methodology. I mean, there's a number of ways to write tests. You can look, if you're like wondering how to do that refinement, you can look for edge cases, like boundary conditions. Like if you have a timing condition, like let's say you're making this Truffle badge NFT and it doesn't go live until tomorrow. So when you write unit tests, maybe you want to say, all right, well, let's pretend it's 11:59 and 59 seconds. I shouldn't be able to get a badge, but at midnight exactly, I should be able to get a badge. And so that's a boundary condition. And if your application kind of has those, then that's a good target for something to test.
Yeah, Nick, that's a good approach. So you're basically saying, in order to kind of first
yeah,
I think how, from a layman's terms, do I want this to look and work, and what am I trying to do? And then you can turn that and translate that into code. Is that what you were basically saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's all about like making sense of your own requirements. Like put yourself in the mind of a user. What might the user do? What should the application allow the user to do?
Yeah, that's
and
great.
It's all about clarity, right? Like software development is all about finding clarity. And so that's why I start in this like conversational approach. I mean, particularly when I'm stuck and I don't know how I'm going to test something, is like treat it like that. It's like it's a conversation that I'm going to have. Like, hey, application, will you let me do this?
Yeah, it's like you're a human being interacting with the technology, right? So you're looking at it from that perspective. Yeah, and there's another.
I want to add on.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Amal. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, our first episode in this series, we talked about approaching blockchain or Ethereum development from using test-driven and behavior-driven programming to develop your contracts. But it's one tool that I find is extremely useful is to get comfortable modeling with UML tools. Like, it promotes this idea or gets you started with abstracting your ideas. Oh, these are the actors in my system, or these are the monsters I create, and this is how they interact with each other. It gives you a really good frame of reference that acts as a context as you're working in different parts of your code. Thinking about how, if you can think about how something is supposed to behave, you're building up that context. And once you have the behavior, the tests just fall out of it. Oh, I have a contract that should have a value. Well, let me test if it actually has that value. And the more you do this, and with practice, you're not only learning to be a better developer, but you're also learning the system more intricately than you would if you were just to not apply this knowledge. So UML diagrams, writing tests, and just practice more. And all the things Nick said, because he gave us enlightenment. It's all good.
No, that's great advice too, Amal. Kevin or Josh, did you want to chime in on that, or did that cover it? Or
I think that's good.
good coverage. Yeah, that was a good answer. We have one more question. From Tom again. Thank you, Tom. He basically mentioned that he's enjoyed using Ganache as part of live demos as opposed to using Rinkeby or another testnet, as he's found it more reliable when showing a demo. What is your funniest or craziest live demo story? Something surprising that occurred that you were not expecting while doing a live demo? That's a good question.
Gosh, I can start by taking that one because I've done a lot of live demos. God, I don't know, funny, like things not working. I mean, that's standard.
Yeah.
Live demos, things not working. Gosh, I did have one.
How did you handle it?
Well, one where I had a glass of water on my desk and I knocked it over and it went all over the keyboard. I mean, this is not related to the actual demo itself going wrong. Although I literally went on the keyboard. And I was trying to keep going and like pretend nothing had happened, sort of thing. This wasn't that long ago. This was like maybe 6 months ago or something like that. So it's funny in a sense, more comical, funny. But yeah, I'm not sure of any other off the top of my head. I'll give some thought to that. And Tom, this is not trying to prematurely segue to the last bit where we'll talk about the community. But if you join on the Slack community, we can talk about. I'll probably after this, I'll be like, oh, there's another funny, like but that's one that definitely sprung to mind. That's more of a comically funny thing. Anyone else?
Oh yeah, I was gonna say we're running up, but sorry, go ahead, jump in.
I was gonna say that's Tom. Thank you for your question, you troublemaker, you. I
love it.
Which Tom is this, by the way?
Tom Hay.
Tom Hay.
Okay, yeah.
I think there was one recently where we took down our staging environment by doing some tests. That was funny, sad, enlightening, all at the same time. Definitely exciting. But that's what demos are for.
I might get a little meta and say that the funniest thing was being asked in a demo. What was the funniest thing that happened during a demo? Sorry,
there you go. I love it. Yeah.
I know Tom's doing demos, so this is a great opportunity to plan.
I'm going to ask Tom next time I'm sitting on
He's anticipating. And like you mentioned, if you want to hop to the next slide, Kevin, because we are coming up to the time. But yeah, love to definitely jump on our Slack community. Although we are officially with Consensus now, which is very exciting. We are still going to have our community here on Slack in the time being. So this is where you can continue the blockchain development conversations, share your funny stories about blockchain development if you have any. Also share with us what you're building with Truffle and all the tools that we have available to you in your blockchain development journey. So the link is, I put it in the chat, but you can see it here. And if you hop to the last slide there, Kevin. So thank you again for tuning in for our very last episode. And if you've been with us from the first episode through now, we really appreciate it and hope that you've gotten the value you hoped from this. And hopefully we got the juice is flowing in terms of innovating in our blockchain development world. So, you know, like I said, happy holidays to everybody, and great job, you guys, Nick, Kevin, Amal, and Josh. Thank you again for hosting and bringing us the knowledge, right? Make sure to follow us on our social channels as usual. Yeah, so I don't know if you guys wanted to end with any kind of words of wisdom as everybody leaves 2020 and is about to enter 2021, which I'm very excited about.
Good riddance to 2020, maybe.
Yeah. Anything that you're looking forward to in terms of blockchain development, Truffle, any of it, for 2021? Just kind of like your last kind of happy holiday kind of note to leave everyone.
I want to say I saw that this is just more about the paradigm. Anyone who follows this guy called Beeple, I think his name. This is kind of digital artist on Twitter and Instagram and stuff, and he's been putting out like art like daily for the last like X number of years, like 7 years. It's wild stuff. It's really cool. He did they've kind of just done an NFT around it, and I think it generated like $3.5 million US for him. You know, as an artist, he sold like the pieces. And yeah, he was tweeting about it and stuff, because I don't think he's not like a techie type, he's not in the space, but I guess the dots got connected, and someone had the idea to kind of essentially launch the art digitally. But that to me was an awesome, obviously DeFi is DeFi and it's kind of bubbling away nicely, but kind of convergence, of perhaps say art and other, and that's been, bubbling away too. But, I think this was a pretty, high profile thing and interesting thing, and a nice convergence there. So my hope, and that's perhaps a good sign for 2021, that we're seeing other beyond DeFi, and obviously DeFi is awesome in and of itself, start, other kind of industries and themes, start to gain more traction, would be a hope. And it looks like it's going that way. So
yeah, it's very exciting, actually. I thought that was really cool.
It's really cool. Yeah, it's such a cool dude, the art, the guy behind it.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, everyone. I know we're at a little over, but we did it. And again, we're so happy that you guys joined us on this experience in this webinar series. And we will definitely have more in 2021. So follow us on those channels. We'll keep you notified on when and where. Thank you again, and have a wonderful holiday, everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Until next
Cheers.
time. See you in the new year.
Thank you.
Bye.